We're back again, and last time I had conversation about the present youngest generation of the Smith and Westmoreland families, and that includes our oldest son Ben's boys, Joseph and Justin, our son Andy's children, who are Grant and Lauren, and our daughter Rebecca's kids, who are Madison and Jameson, Maddie and Jamie. And we are the proud parents of this whole group, kids, grandkids. Linda and I were married 4th of July 1972, just after we graduated from San Diego State. We had met at a church youth group when I was a junior in high school, and it took us some years to figure out how this worked, but it has worked ever since, and we're very, very grateful for that. We also talked a bit about my my parents, James David Smith Jr., native San Diegan, and my mother, Cornelia Beatrice Rand Smith, born in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. Went to Nevada when 3 years old, 1913, when her father had profound health issues, a doctor, but at that time they didn't know what to do about his diabetes and some other issues. And so to Nevada in 1913, and ultimately to San Diego in 1930, where he passed on. And she was called by her mother, my mom, Connie Smith, called by her mother to come back to San Diego and help care for a couple of younger siblings. So she finished at San Diego State. She was one of the first classes on the quote-unquote new campus out in what now is the college area. The other special couple, Linda's folks, Dolph and Eleanor Westmoreland, met in Arkansas. They married on the way out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And with that, they settled in Southern California for a while, in Hollywood, then the Imperial Valley as well, and up to Coronado, and then San Diego, first Valencia Park, and then into the college area on College Avenue. And they were married over 50 years, and a very special couple. Never quite left behind the Arkansas part in terms of deep roots, but it had been a kind of a poignant journey because, as we'll say in a moment, reviewing the parents of these dear people, who were Linda's and my parents, there's a story behind all this. And so let's go to the next generation. In this setup, Linda and I are generation 3, if you will. Our parents are 4, and then moving backwards, we hit the 5th generation. And so let's start there, if we may. And that is James David Smith, born during the Civil War. He was 52 when my dad was born during the Civil War. And in Pennsylvania. And then his wife, Lillian May Pfeiffer, she would become his wife some years later. She was from Pennsylvania as well, western part of the state, little town called Parker, along the Allegheny River. And so they met around the turn of the century, and each of them had had a previous marriage, which had not ultimately gone well. From my grandpa Smith's side, James David number 1, he actually was married in his early 20s. He had 2 sons in the 1880s, then went off to do militia work and army work on the frontier for several years. Came back, and there was a a continued relationship, but it was troubled. One of my relatives, who knew more about Pennsylvania than I do, said that there was someone in the family, according to family tradition, that was a troublemaker, and helped really that relationship go sour. So he waited until the boys were of age, and then he and his first wife separated. So that was a difficult story. For my grandmother, Lillian, there was also a challenging story because her father, who was a Civil War veteran, as was J.D. Smith's father, her father, Lily's, was someone who fought in the Civil War, 61st Pennsylvania, and his health was broken, most would say, during that Civil War experience, lung problems and other issues like that. And so he died at 46 in 1876, and my grandma spent significant time in an orphanage out in Pennsylvania. Then she married a person who was the father of her two sons, and that was Ernest and Ivan. I knew Ernie when he moved to the West Coast when I was a kid. But in any case, that was a challenging marriage. I found out from a different cousin out there that her first husband had a criminal record that was fairly extensive in terms of violence, and so there was a divorce there. There is a document that suggests that he pressured her into trying to remarry over the border in New York, but at that point my grandfather stepped forward and said, "Let's go west, let's get married, bring your boys with you. My boys are already in their 20s, and let's start a new life in San Diego." And so they came out this way in 1911. He was a mortician, and so he, in this area, became an undertaker in that trade. Ultimately, Smith and Dunn, he brought a gentleman named Michael Goodbody into the business. Amazing name for an undertaker. And Goodbody's mortuary is still around. He brought Michael Goodbody in late 1920, and it became Smith, Goodbody, and Dunn. And you can guess what the phrase was that grew out of that. In any case, they were married, J.D. number one and Lily, married until her passing of stomach cancer in 1929, and so we'll pause at that point. And then he passed on during World War II in 1945, when there was word that my dad had been cut off in action in the Pacific, the 6th Army. So dear people, and their pictures smiling back at us are always very touching to me.